Today on The Future of Everything, the future of biomechanics. Now, biomechanics is the study of the internal and external forces affecting the movement or structure of living organisms, or so that's what the internet tells me. It enables us to understand fundamental activities of life, particularly relevant to movement. How do humans walk? How do they stay balanced? How can they be most efficient in their walking and their running? How do they coordinate their arms and their legs? How do they do all of this while concentrating on something else? What about this changes when we're running, or we're jumping, or we're swimming? Biomechanics has great value also in evolution as we compare the structure of different organisms and how they move. Cats versus tigers, apes versus humans, dinosaurs, which we have never even seen, we can make inferences about how they may have moved. And in the context of healthcare, it's not just about curiosity, but it can be about important healthcare conditions. Children with muscular dystrophy who might have troubles with walking and gait problems. People who have suffered a stroke. In these settings, we can appreciate the exquisite coordination of muscles, bones, ligaments, and cartilage, and try to use this knowledge to help people with these challenges. Dr. Scott Delp is a professor of bioengineering, mechanical engineering, and orthopedics at Stanford University. Scott, how did you become interested in biomechanics, and what have been the changes you've seen over the last 25 years in our understanding of biomechanics and our capabilities?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. It's great to be here. I got interested in studying human movement because I had my own impairment in movement. I was skiing with some buddies during the winter as an undergraduate, and I had a bad ski wreck and ripped some muscles off of my pelvis. And following that, I really had difficulty walking for about 5 years. And it wasn't clear what to do or how to restore that. I visited lots of great orthopedists and physical therapists. And so I kind of turned to my own engineering know-how to try to sort out how to best recover muscle strength, range of motion, coordination, and then ended up coming to Stanford and studying as a mechanical engineer, interested in robotics, studying with a neuroscientist. And that combination of dynamics and robotics and neuroscience and computational methods really turned out to be a powerful approach.
Yeah.
So when you think about movement, it's really complicated. If you think about a robot, we would never try to design a robot or a satellite without engineering tools. But most of what we do or did in studying movement back when I was a graduate student is watch people move and then try to just think about it and figure out what's going on. It's not possible to do that.
Yes, and there's a lot going on under the hood that is difficult to believe. So just going back to your industry, your injury, did they know what was wrong and not know how to treat it, or they didn't even know what was wrong?
No, they didn't know. I'm old, as you know, and exactly your age.
I think you're a perfectly good age.
And back then, when you got hurt, there wasn't routine MRI that you could do to assess what was going on. So it was more just about physical examinations and your symptoms, and there weren't good diagnostic methods that were broadly used.
Yes. So so that actually is a great entree into if you had that injury today, what are the kinds of things that would happen to give us a sense of how the field has moved forward?
Yeah, if somebody walked in to one of our clinics now and had an injury like that, the first thing we do was get an MRI. And we know exactly what was hurt, what the extent of the injury was, what the optimal rehabilitation would be. Back then, the plan was immobilization, so they put me in a cast, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do for a soft tissue injury. So, you
great
take
for a bone that you need to set.
The bones healed, but my bones weren't broken.
Right.
You take off the cast and your muscles are gone and they're all scarred down. So now what you do when there's a soft tissue injury, we keep it moving, gently moving with continuous passive motion so the soft tissue can recover but doesn't get stiff and you don't lose the strength of your muscles.
Makes perfect sense. So I know that as your career has progressed, one of the areas, and you've focused on many areas, and I'd love to hit as many of them as possible, but let's go to the first one that I was aware of was the use of these kinds of technologies and ways of thinking for looking at kids with muscular dystrophy. So could you kind of, for people who are not familiar with the disease, could you characterize what's the issue with the disease, what have been traditional ways to treat it, and how is biomechanical insights kind of revolutionizing the way we look at these children and help them?
Yeah, so the area that I've began to focus and still work on is cerebral palsy rather than muscular dystrophy.
Sorry. Tell us about that disease.
Yeah, in kids with cerebral palsy, it's quite common. About 2 in every 1,000 kids born have CP, and it's primarily a movement disorder that arises from damage to the developing brain. So, and gait impairments in walking are a primary problem. So kids want to be able to walk and run and play with their peers. And if they are moving slowly or can't walk at all, it's really holds them back. And so their families come into the clinic and they're very concerned about how to optimize their performance. And that's the way I frame this. It's the way I frame all of biomechanics. We're here to optimize people's performance.
Okay,
so if
great.
if it's a kid with cerebral palsy, we want to get them able to walk or walk at a higher speed, or if they're already good at household ambulation, walking out into the community or running with their friends. So for sure, a physical exam by a doctor is important, but we also have them come through a motion capture lab. So we use cameras and characterize the motions that they can perform now. And then we use a detailed biomechanical model to see which muscles are causing what motion.
So this is a computational model?
A computational model to...
I see.
And
you try to replicate what you're seeing in their walk to get, as we said, to look under the hood at how the muscles might be not optimally firing.
Exactly. So we can measure the external motion, but we don't know what's happening inside. But we take a biomechanical model, we match it to that subject, we reproduce their dynamics, and then we know inside what's happening. And then we could simulate surgery, we could simulate a Botox injection, we could put a brace on, and then we simulate a new movement and to see what therapy is going to best restore motion.
So this sounds great because in addition to getting all of this insight, you just listed a whole bunch of potential interventions to help the child. So let's just go through those. So what kind of surgeries might you do that would help a patient with a walking dynamics problem?
Yeah, so one of the common gait abnormality is walking down in a crouch. So, and it is thought frequently that the hamstrings muscles that cross behind your knee are too tight, they're firing too much, and lengthening those muscles surgically, it's like a surgically assisted hamstring stretch,
yes,
could enable them to extend their knees and walk in a more erect posture. So one of the things that we've been doing is to understand which patients are good candidates for that, which are not good candidates. And we find for these muscle lengthening surgeries, if we can identify good candidates, the outcome rate of surgery is much better than we can do with just watching them walk or even with sophisticated gait analysis. We need that motion data with a biomechanical model to understand exactly what's causing what and what the intervention should be.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Scott Delp right now about cerebral palsy and helping plan surgeries. So how enthusiastic are your physician-surgeon collaborators about having you're an engineer who comes in and makes pretty strong recommendations to what they should be doing? Is that a stressful interaction or a positive one?
No, it's a very positive interaction. It's a multidisciplinary team that includes a surgeon, a neurologist, a physical therapist, a gait analyst, and usually an engineer or two that meets to review these cases. And it's pretty clear that we need all of us to make good decisions for every kid that comes in. And so the best labs, including the lab here at Stanford and other leading children's hospitals, all have an engineer on their team. And that those multidisciplinary teams also get together at national conferences so that engineers can share best practices,
Yes.
and we debate cases openly. People will bring their tough cases, and we do it as a whole
Kind
community.
of floating all boats. So
Yeah.
the second intervention I think you mentioned is Botox. So I think of it's a toxin. It causes paralysis, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me where Botox might play a role in some therapy.
Yeah. So in cerebral palsy, one issue is spasticity of muscles. So the muscles are overexcited. They're excited in response to a stretch that normally we could move our joints and stretch muscles, and they could stay relaxed. So that occurs in stroke and spinal cord injury as well. Spasticity is a big problem. And one of the uses of Botox is to inject muscles that are spastic to try to reduce their activity. It's just the way people inject Botox into their face to essentially paralyze your face
So that you don't have
so
wrinkles.
that you don't have wrinkles.
I've lost that battle. Sorry.
Me too. So you can inject skeletal muscles in the limbs to try to restore more normal range of motion and reduce spasticity.
So you mentioned in this discussion of treatments that this might also work for stroke. And as everybody knows, stroke is a huge burden on society. It causes great challenges for people who've suffered from strokes. I take it that in addition to helping these children, many of these technologies are also applicable to people who have lost maybe half part of their right side or left side from a stroke. What is the current opportunities and achievements in that area?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked. It's an area that I've been thinking about a lot and we're beginning to work on. And the way stroke rehab happens now is, again, we're trying to optimize somebody's performance. It may be a dad who wants to walk down the aisle with his daughter at a wedding and he's unable to walk, so we're trying to achieve those meaningful objectives. And the way it's done now in clinic, patient will come in, meet with a physical therapist or occupational therapist for 45 minutes, and there's an outpatient, for example, and they'll work hard on those goals. The problem is the dose of therapy is too small. Mm-hmm. We give them exercises to go home with. We don't know if they do it.
I recently got a prescription to do some exercises.
Yeah. Are you doing them?
6 weeks ago. I haven't done it once.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things we want to do is develop a program for ubiquitous rehabilitation so that we can monitor you to see if you're doing your exercises. We can guide you through the exercises. You know, if you're and the dose of therapy we could get, if somebody has a stroke, if they want to recover and you have a paretic limb, if you don't use that limb, it will not recover.
So what does paretic mean?
So it's paralyzed. Essentially. So in stroke, as you mentioned, one side of the brain is usually affected, and it's the other side of the body that's affected. And that affected side we usually call a paretic side or a paretic limb.
Gotcha.
And you need to use that. The only therapy we really know that works is if you take the unaffected side and you constrain it. And people to use to get through life.
So force them to use the so-called bad arm or bad leg.
Yes, exactly. So the goal of future rehab, to do rehab everywhere, is to track people's limbs, give them guidance, remind them that they need to use the limb so that they don't get 45 minutes of therapy a week. They're getting therapy every day, all the time. And if we do that, they will recover more quickly and more robustly.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm speaking with Dr. Scott Delp about stroke recovery and the importance of sustained rehab and not just episodic rehab. Now, but you said something there that I wanted to catch on, which is you said that we might be able to, for example, put on sensors and monitor how they're doing. So this all of a sudden becomes part of the kind of digital mobile health world. And of course, there's also issues of privacy. Like my doctor doesn't know that I haven't done any of the exercises that she prescribed 6 weeks ago. And in fact, if I happen to see...
And you'll probably lie to her.
And I will totally lie to her
Exactly.
and say, yeah, you know, I'm still having the pain. And those exercises didn't seem to work because I didn't do them. So is this now part of a bigger digital health movement? And I know you've worked in this area. What is the way to approach this so that you can gain the confidence and trust of the patients while helping them? So they don't say, uh-oh, now this is part of a big brother rehab routine. And now I'm feeling nervous that I'm going to be judged by my doctor. I won't be able to lie to my doctor. And so this is all very problematic.
Yeah. So this is one of the big transformations of studying human movement. For me as a biomechanist, my students and I will historically do studies of 10 or 20 or maybe 50 subjects. They come into the lab. But now everybody is equipped with an accelerometer. So most
Like in
of the
your
people,
phone?
Yeah, and your phone's equipped with an accelerometer and a gyro that measures velocities, and that's how the user interface works. For me as a biomechanist, I now have millions of subjects around the world that we can monitor and collect their data. So your question was, how do we go about doing that in an ethical way?
Helping people, but also maintaining their trust.
Exactly. So people have to consent. So they have to consent to an informed consent. So we're going to do this. Do you agree? And if they don't agree, then we don't have them participate.
So
but most people, they want to get better. And so the quantity of data we can get on people's movement, for the kids with CP, they may come, cerebral palsy, they may come to the lab once a year, but we can take videotapes of them once a week and see how their gait is progressing, if they're getting worse, if they're getting better, how the therapy's going. And that level of monitoring is extremely valuable because the way we do it now is just super constrained based on expensive equipment.
Yeah. So tell me. So it's obvious to me, not even being an expert, that there's going to be a difference in the quality of data you get when you bring somebody. I think you called it the gait lab or the instrumentation lab, where you watch them take movies, get a really good idea of every single muscle and how it's moving, versus the kind of data you might get from a watch, a Fitbit, or from a cell phone. So clearly, there's a degradation in the quality of data that you're getting. On the other hand, as you said, this is for millions of people. So how much information can you extract from my phone or from my Fitbit about what my activity level is and whether I'm optimized, to use the word that you introduced before?
Yeah, so we can get pretty good data from a video. So we've been working on problems, and this is an area of tremendous growth where from a video we extract meaningful biomechanical variables.
And this is like a phone video.
You just take a video with your phone, and from that we can use machine learning algorithms and fit a biomechanical model to your video data and get pretty high quality data characterizing your motion, sufficient to predict some clinical outcomes. So
that's amazing.
That's exciting.
This is something that used to be, I have to do it in the gait lab, and now at least for a subset of cases, a movie from an iPhone or a Samsung might be enough.
You could just submit the video to a website anonymously, and you'd get a score and some biomechanical insights that we could essentially deliver for free. So that's opposed to an expensive test when you come in the gait lab. From just the accelerometer on a phone or a Fitbit, you get different kinds of data, and it's much lower resolution than that. But we still can figure out how someone's using their arm if they've had a stroke, for example, or just how much physical activity that you're getting. And physical activity is super important. Without sufficient physical activity, we really suffer, not just cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but 4 kinds of cancer, depression, anxiety,
mood,
are profoundly affected by the lack of human movement. So one of the big areas in biomechanics and the studies of human movement is to motivate mobility. Only 20% of the people in the U.S. get sufficient physical activity to maintain their bodies and minds.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. More with Dr. Scott Delp, especially on this issue of mobility, its benefits, and ways to encourage it, next on SiriusXM Insight 121. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Scott Delp about biomechanics, but now also mobility in general and its health importance and benefits. So at the end of the last segment, you kind of said something that's amazing. You said that it's not just about your cardiovascular health in terms of the importance of movement or daily functional activities, but this can have implications, I think you said, for cancer, for mood disorders, psychiatric and neurologic, and many other parts of health. So say a little bit more about that and say, what kind of ways can we bring technology in to help people know that they even have a problem that needs to be addressed in terms of their mobility?
Yeah, so this is a huge public health need and really a great opportunity. Physical activity is really potent medicine. It works on lots of different things in terms of disease prevention. As I mentioned, a number of different diseases that go well beyond what is traditionally known in cardiovascular health and diabetes and obesity. but to many types of cancer, there's a clear and statistically significant link between physical activity and cancer risk. And also, when you think about mood, the big two, depression and anxiety, physical activity is a potent antidepressant and an effective anti-anxiety medicine. And the awesome thing here, too, is that for sure vigorous physical activity is important, but the medicine works even in small doses. And even in single doses, like going for a good long walk or hike, you get benefit immediately.
And it's measurable, and people have shown it.
It's absolutely measurable. There's very clear evidence for this. And so this is an opportunity because it is essentially free, potent medicine that is effective across a broad class of diseases and disorders.
So I know that you lead a big national center trying to focus on mobility and mobilization, presumably with these kinds of goals in mind. So tell me how technology and the kinds of expertise that you have can be deployed to help a much larger piece of the population assess their own health and hopefully improve it.
Yeah, so it's a big data center funded by the NIH focused on human movement. And so one of the things that we did was we used people's cell phones to monitor their movement. So we conducted the largest survey of physical activity in the world by a factor of 1,000. So instead of having hundreds or thousands, we had millions of subjects who were participating in this study.
All with consent?
They consented through the use of the app.
Amazing.
It wasn't...
so you can do it at a large scale.
You can do it at a large scale. And one of the amazing things we found was that the activity in a population is not distributed uniformly. And that gives us really great insight. So just like there's income inequality, there's activity inequality. So there's activity-rich people and activity-poor people. And a greater fraction of people who are activity-poor are women. And where there are populations where women are activity-poor, they lose life years. We also can figure out that if we're going to do an intervention, where you want to intervene is with people who are activity poor, because there a small dose will make a big difference to get people up to more healthy levels of physical activity.
So if somebody is regularly exercising, prescribing more exercise, they probably would do it, but the incremental benefit might not be that great.
If they want to compete or something like that, they're going to need more exercise. But just to maintain physical and mental health, where you can have the greatest effect, is in individuals who are activity poor. So a screening to identify in the population where there's opportunity is a great public health possibility.
Do we have good knowledge about what to do when we've identified these individuals?
It's a great question, and we just started a project called the Catalyst Project that I'm leading. It brings together psychology and biology and genetics and even English department related to narratives to get people engaged in stories, so that as the story progresses, it only progresses. So it's a real challenge because behavior change is very hard.
Yes.
And the only thing you can do to get people to really change things fundamentally over the long term is if there's some real meaningful value that's deep within, some emotional connection to
motivate the ongoing change.
To motivate an ongoing change. And the current way of just quantifying and giving people data doesn't work. It works in a few people, people who are kind of compulsive. It can kind of work. But for a lot of people, it can actually be discouraging because they see their data, it's compared to a norm, they're below the norm, and they feel inadequate. And that's a showstopper for lots of people. So the way current apps are delivering those data work for some people and don't work for a lot of people. So one of the things we're trying to do is solve this master problem of how do you motivate physical activity. Knowledge isn't enough. Everybody knows moving around is good for you, but it doesn't get people going.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Dr. Scott Delp, and now we're talking about a little bit of behavioral science. But I want to stay there for a minute because I think what you just said rings true for a lot of people. A lot of people have got a Fitbit. They have a great 2 months with it, and then either the battery goes out or they take it off for some reason and it never gets back on. And so the behavior has not fundamentally changed. And I believe that you have I reviewed your papers. I think you have started to write a little bit about these motivational issues and like people's self-image and the importance of your self-image with respect to how much you might try hard or not try hard. So that was an exciting and surprising thing for me to see, because I thought, okay, the guest is going to be a bioengineer, but he looks like he cares about these motivational type issues. So can you say a little bit more about what is thought to work, what doesn't work, and what we should be doing?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I'll tell you 2 stories. One is about people who have osteoarthritis. So in many instances, they think moving hurts. I shouldn't move. It's going to make my disease worse. It's actually the opposite is true. And so for them, the motivation is reducing their pain. People are very motivated to reduce their pain. If you hurt and you have a way out of it, and that's a pretty good fundamental motivation.
Yes.
So for people with osteoarthritis to view their disease as modifiable, an opportunity to change, versus it's just a sentence to sedentary behavior of pain for many years. So you need to kind of flip that switch to get people going. So I've been working with Ali Crum. She's a professor in psychology who studies mindset and how information that you give people not only changes their behavior, but changes their physiology.
Wow.
So
what do you mean by what does physiology mean in that
so
setting?
For example, we had people come into our lab in one of Ali's experiments, and we did a genetic test on them where people have high or low aerobic capacity. We measured their aerobic capacity in the human performance lab that I direct, measured their VO2 max, how much oxygen they can burn. It's a measure of your fitness. We had them come back, so we know what their fitness is.
Yes.
We have them come back a week later, and then we randomize them to tell them whether they have high or low capacity. If you tell them they have low capacity, they work just as hard, but their physiology changes. What the oxygen content, the CO2 content, things that you cannot voluntarily control are changed.
We thought.
Yeah. Well, so it's not really voluntary.
Right.
It's
Something's
subconscious
going on.
For sure. Something is going on in physiological measures.
Just telling them
Just
what
telling
their
them.
genetics showed
Absolutely.
changed their physiological capability.
Yes.
Which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yes. So how you view exercise can also change how you respond to the exercise. So it's not just the amount, but how you're approaching it. And if you're approaching it as a burden, as a medicine you have to take versus a social, fun activity. These are the things that Ali's teaching me that we need to bring biomechanics and psychology together. Yeah.
Because with your surveillance capabilities, and I use that in a positive way, you might discover that there are people that you want to alert that your activity level is a danger to your health, but just telling them that is not enough. And now you're beginning to get insights into how you might actually be able to advance their understanding to help them intervene.
The other big thing that has to change is personalization. Currently, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, but people respond differently to different stories, to different motivations. And we need to be able to understand what motivates individuals and personalize these interventions so that it works for you. And that what works for you is not going to work for everybody. So we need to really be able to discover that and deliver it.
So it's great because early on you were saying that these take interdisciplinary teams, and you mentioned doctors and you mentioned engineers, but it's very clear to me that the future of those teams is social scientists and behavioral scientists, psychologists who can go the final mile to help the patient make those interventions.
Yeah, even storytellers.
Thank you for listening to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. If you missed any of this episode, listen anytime, on demand, with the SiriusXM app.